and Neko rolls down on his training bike. I was like, oh, hey, Si. And he was like, it was like, you know, finger pointing and like intense, and like, I need to talk to you. And I was like, okay then.
All right. You've been involved with Neko in the Frameworks project and making steel downhill bikes. Yeah, I guess go back to the start of that. Talk a bit about how that came together and the process that you went through and how that's been as an experience, because it's a super cool project.
Yeah, that was really cool. So I met Neko Fort William World Cup 22.
Yeah. World champs, in fact, was it?
No, it was World Cup 22.
Oh, yeah, World Cup 22.
That was when I first met Neko.
Yeah.
Because you obviously introduced us.
Yeah.
And he was right at the bottom of the learning curve. If you've watched any of the Frameworks episodes, obviously there was a big learning curve, and they were already, even in May 22, they were experiencing difficulties with like cracking and like some of the stuff that they were managing through that season. So I just had a look at the bike and just gave him a bit of advice, really, just, you know, particularly with the gussets and things like that. Just said, this is what, you know, in my opinion, I would, you know, if you're having these problems, maybe try this.
Yeah. Yeah, because you've manufactured in aluminium before, way back with the Hemlock, right? So you've got some experience with the material.
Well, it's a little bit of that, but it's also just a more general engineering thing. I mean, it's like that, you know, I use gussets on the steel frames. He was using gussets on the aluminium frames. He was having certain issues. It's like, well, I can.
It's the same.
My experience and intuition says that if you're having this issue, then probably try this. So it was just a bit of a direction, gut feel. Meet the guy, which was lovely. He's such a G. Yeah, that was really, really cool. And we exchanged numbers, and he messaged me a couple of times over the summer, just like asking questions, basically.
Yeah, he's an inquisitive fella, isn't he?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And then in 2022, I took the whole Cotic company, everyone in the company, to Leger Worlds as a thank you for hanging together through COVID, basically. So although it wasn't just a holiday, we did get to do some riding, and it was absolutely brilliant fun. We did have a booth. Yeah. But we were rolling down the hill from our chalet, which is halfway up the hill, and Leger is mad because the event, if you've never been, it's wild. The event is literally in the town.
Yeah, it's the whole of the
whole of the town. And like, there are pits on people's driveways and like, you know, in the sides of buildings, and you go around a corner and it's like, oh, they're specialized, you know, it's mad. It's really cool. But we were rolling down the hill, and on one of these driveways was Atherton and Frameworks.
Yeah.
And I rolled by, and it was all kind of closed up. But I was like, oh, cool, I'll go and say hi to Neko at some point. And I was stopped like 100 meters down the road, because that's where our other accommodation was, where some of the guys were. And Neko rolls down on his training bike. I was like, oh, hey, Si. And he was like, it was like, you know, finger pointing and like intense, like, I need to talk to you. And I was like, okay then.
All right.
So I said, come by the booth. And anyway, Neko and Ancho came by the booth the following day, and we had a long talk. He was still having trouble with cracking the aluminium frames, and he was racing like the least cracked ones,
it was
which
insane.
The mental toughness involved in being able to do that just blows my mind. I mean, it's just another level beyond just racing those bikes in those conditions. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely wild. But we started talking about doing a steel front end, because he was interested in the properties, but more specifically, he was interested in durability at that point, but he was also interested in that steel feel and all of that kind of stuff. So he gave me a bunch of specifications for how the frames were built. Those very first Mark I frames were built.
When you say specifications, are we talking like geometry and things?
The geometry came later, when I was actually laying out the frame. This was actually more specifically tube sizes and thicknesses. Okay. Like, what, you know, if you're having cracking, what are you dealing? What are you dealing with at the moment?
Yeah.
that all went. We had the whole event, and it was great fun and all of that. Spoke to Neko again a couple of times during the event, and then on the long drive home, this was turning over in my head, and I started doing some hand calcs and just real first year statics. Second moment of area. Like, if you're an engineer, you know what I'm talking about.
You make it sound easy. I've forgotten all of that.
Just started working out roughly what the stiffnesses and strengths of the tubes in his front triangle were.
Yeah.
Working out
in the aluminium
version, working out what the stiffnesses and strengths of an 853 tube set would be. Reynolds 853, which is like the really high strength steel that we tend to use for most of our bikes, certainly all of our drop link bikes. And the numbers that were dropping out the bottom were like, well, actually, I mean, even though it was a down tube, even though he moved on from that for the Generation 2 frame, which he's had no issues with at all, at the time, I was like, well, the down tube that we use on our enduro bike, because we have a custom drawn down tube for our enduro bike, that down tube is stronger than the down tube you're using on your downhill bike.
Yeah.
So that
World Cup racing.
So that was the point at which I was like, oh, okay, we're in the game here. It's not like I've got to come up with something completely new or try and get Reynolds to make something they've never made before.
Yeah.
We could actually make something which is easily more durable than what is on now, without basically from a lot of the tubes that I was already using.
Yeah.
So that was the basis of the first bike. That was built by Five Land Bikes, who are our UK frame builder, who make all of our full suspension bikes.
Yeah, up in Scotland.
And so they built a couple of those, and that was, and then Neko did the testing on those. No, Neko didn't do the test. He broke his hip, didn't he?
Yeah, he was broken, wasn't he? Yeah.
Yeah. So Neko broke his hip early in the season, but he got a lot of other people to do testing on the steel frame during kind of March, April 23.
Yeah.
And the feedback is that timing wise, it was pretty inconclusive, but there was definitely a feel to the frame which was different and more comfortable, and all of the Dan Roberts, who's the other engineer on the job, who works for Raw as well, he rode the bike, and he said it had this he said he's never felt he said he's never got up to speed on a downhill bike so quickly. He said it had just like a calmness to it. So these are all the performance advantages that when I say we use steel for performance for Cotic, these are exactly all the things that I'm talking about. Is like, performance isn't just, weight, which is this metric that
or
everyone,
stiffness.
Or even stiffness is like, or like maximum stiffness isn't necessarily the thing.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing with MotoGP bikes, as a bit of a digression, they started making them out of carbon fiber a few years ago, and they became unrideable because they leaned the bike over so far. If you think like this, if you think the suspension basically goes up and down in the side view, if you're looking at a rider going along, the suspension goes up and down. If you're leant right over, suspension isn't doing anything. The forces are still going up, and the suspension's like almost 90 degrees, or certainly like 70 degrees to it. So the flex of the frame was what was giving the bikes the traction through the curves. And that's exactly the thing that I feel is the advantage of using steel in a mountain bike setting, because those when you're leant over and you're in those chattery sort of situations, that's where you get the advantage. So that was generally the feeling, that it wasn't any slower and than the aluminium bike. It definitely had some different ride characteristics. So Neko was interested in this, but by this point they'd moved on to the Generation 2 aluminium frame, which is pretty much the basis of the production frame that they'd done. So the one with the sideways shock and the little shock shuttle and all of that kind of stuff. So Neko wanted some more steel frames for testing. And I said, well, there's no point building any more of the old ones.
Yeah.
So let's figure out how to do some Gen 2 frames effectively. So basically it was the same tube set, but with the new layout and for the new shock and all of that kind of stuff. And the 5-line guys designed a little 3D printed shock mount so that it would all like fit together. That was the raw frame that Neko raced at Worlds 23 in Fort William
that was
in
super
August,
cool.
which was really cool. And that for me is like, I've been a fan of the sport and riding bikes since I was 11, and I grew up, watching guys like, Tomac and Jason McCroy and like Petey, in the early days and all of these guys and Neko, Villiers and all of those guys. And then and we're not a race we never set out to make race bikes particularly. Yeah. We make bikes for riders. So to be at the World Championships, having someone race a bike that I've designed was just like, just like 11-year-old me was just like, oh my God. I mean, 47-year-old me was pretty stoked. So no, it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. And Neko's such a great guy. He's so well, and like the team, Ancho and all the guys, they're so welcoming.
Yeah.
So sort of going in the pit and we're chatting about the bike, and it's just like, yeah, it was such a great experience.